Terry McLaurin has seen double-digit targets in just 4 games since the start of the 2024 NFL season, and if David Blough does his job right, that is about to change.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, and I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credentialed member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9. Also in writing for Commanders on SI, here with you 5 days a week. And coming up on today's episode, Frankie Luvu disappeared last season, and Durante Jones wants to make him reappear in 2026. And before the new class of Commanders comes in, we're finding out who the teachers are and what subjects they're going to be teaching. But first, elite receivers are supposed to see elite volume. So if Terry McLaurin is a #1 receiver, then it's time he gets used like it. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. David Blough, new offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders, of course, spoke with the media for the first time in a press conference, did several one-on-ones, including one with WSA 9 and reporter John Duran. And what really stood out from the interview that David Blough did with John was his mentioning of how much he wants to really focus on getting Terry McLaurin the ball, specifically hitting that 10 target per game type of production. And it's not to say that David Blough is saying that they're just going to force the ball to Terry McLaurin 10 times a game. What the real takeaway here is that Terry McLaurin is someone that David Blough wants to be able to facilitate getting the ball to, at least trying to get the ball to 10 times any given game. And of course, it's not going to be an ultimate thing. It's not going to be a thing where you can do it every single week, but every person in the National Football League, I would like to think anyway, right, has to understand that if you're going to get somebody the ball 10 times a game, you can't just line them up in the exact same place. You can't just use them in the exact same route combinations, and you can't use them in the exact same way for 70 snaps a game or 60 snaps a game, however many snaps you end up in a single game. And of course, with the background that David Blough is coming from, and of course, some of the other statements that he said on Tuesday about being flexible, being multiple, being able to kind of cater to what your guys do the best, I think that is the expectation, is that not only is Terry going to get fed the ball more often than we've seen at any point in the last 2 seasons, but he's also going to get moved around to facilitate feeding him the ball, being a smart thing to do, not just a deliberate thing to do. And I think that's really what the point is here. David Blough saying to John Duran in the one-on-one interview, quote, "This thing's going to be built around how do we get Terry 10 targets a game and get him explosive receptions after explosive receptions to kind of flip the field." And end quote. And like I said, in the past 2 seasons, Terry McLaurin has only been targeted 10 or more times in a single regular season game 4 times. That's 15% of his games. He's played 27 games in the last 2 seasons. Obviously, last year he missed some time because of those injuries, but those 4 games, just 15% of the time that he was available on the field in 2024 and 2025 combined. Mind you, this is in a quote-unquote air raid offense that really wants to accentuate the deep ball and all this stuff. The offensive coordinator literally sat in front of us multiple times and told us that if he had it his way, he would just throw the ball downfield over and over and over again. And certainly they did do that in certain extents to a certain degree at times, but clearly not doing enough things. And we saw this. We saw this in 2024. This wasn't just a 2020-2025 issue. Now in 2024, he gets 3 of those 4 games. 2025, only 1 of those 4 games. And it's about 10% of the games that he played in 2025, 18% of the games that he played in 2024. But even if he plays the same rate, so 2024, perfectly healthy, available for all the games, things are going well, they're putting up a lot of points, they're scoring, Jayden's throwing the ball 18% of the time. That equals 3 games. If Terry McLaurin does that again, he still comes in 6th, which would be tied with some of the other players that we're going to talk about, including CeeDee Lamb. And you might say, well, CeeDee Lamb is a wide receiver #1. He's getting that type of production. Understand, CeeDee Lamb has also missed time with injuries. Also, CeeDee Lamb played all of 2025 with George Pickens, who actually, from a statistical standpoint, actually became their #1 receiver for quite a part of the season. There is no running mate with Terry McLaurin, so it makes it even more urgent if you're the offensive coordinator that you're finding ways to get him the ball when he is available. So again, it's not just an isolated incident. This is kind of a systemic problem that I think is just one of the systemic problems that David Blough is coming in with the intention, in his own words, to try and fix. Let's look at this compared to some other number one receivers on their teams in the National Football League. Jamar Chase, in the same time frame, 17 games of 10 or more targets in a single regular season game. Puka Nacua, 15 games. And these are two guys, I know you're going to say, like, they're at the top of the league. Terry's not at that top of the league. Got it. Understand that. But understand, as these guys, Jamar Chase and Puka Nacua, are at the quote-unquote top of the league, they're getting even more attention from defenses than the Washington Commanders' number one receiver, Terry McLaurin, is. Yet their offensive coordinators are still finding ways, including Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase comes from a Cincinnati Bengals offense that has been criticized left and right, that has been talked about as being uninspired, lacking creativity, all this kind of stuff, and still they're finding a way to get him these targets every single game. Puka Nacua, 15 times, 10 or more targets. Malik Neighbors, and this comes into the usage thing, because I know part of the argument is going to be, well, Terry McLaurin missed a lot of time. It's hard to get a guy into that kind of a usage rate, a target rate, when he's not available as much. Malik Neighbors has played in 19 games in the last 2 years, which, by the way, is just his first 2 years in the National Football League, in an anemic Giants offense that has not done a lot of great things over the course of the last 2 seasons, which is why Brian Daboll is out of a head coaching job. 11 games, 7 more times in 8 fewer games than Terry McLaurin. So it kind of takes away from the, well, this is just specific to 2025, specific to Terry's holdout, specific to Terry's injuries. Malik Neighbors coming in as a rookie last year, injured. I think he was injured like week 4 this year. 19 games. He's played 8 fewer games the last 2 years and has 7 more games under his belt than Terry McLaurin does, where he's been targeted 10 or more times. Also, Wan'Dale Robinson, the Giants' number 2 receiver, also has more 10-plus reception game or target games than Terry McLaurin does. CeeDee Lamb sits at 11, even though he's got George Pickens out there. T. Higgins, the Cincinnati Bengals' number 2 receiver. This is actually who Terry McLaurin, if Terry McLaurin matched his 18% 10-plus target games rate in 2024 and in 2025, he would have had 6 total games. This is who he would have tied with, T. Higgins, the number 2 receiver in Cincinnati. The number 1 receiver in Washington in an air raid offense would have tied with the number 2 receiver in what's considered one of the not so great, not creative, at least explosive, certainly not creative offenses in the National Football League. So again, it's just something that is not, we've talked about this before, whether it's lining up on the left side 70% of the time, things like that. I've told you that when Terry McLaurin ran a right to left side drag routes against Philadelphia Eagles at the end of the season last year, my mind was blown. I was like, I don't know the last time I saw Terry McLaurin run a right to left side drag routes. And you should not be amazed to see a wide receiver in the National Football League run a drag route, but yet there I was watching number 17 run a drag route and saying, hold up, what's going on here? What is this new magic we see on the football field? And I still stand firm that I think the last 2 weeks of the offense last year was more of a dress rehearsal for David Blough than it was anything else. Don't have confirmation of that, probably will never get confirmation of that, but I just believe that as well. Speaking of wide receivers, David Blough in the one-on-one conversation with John Duran believes that they can have an impact on the game beyond just catching the ball. Quote, these guys, talking about receivers, whether they're sparking a long run in the running game with blocking on the perimeter or creating explosive passes, thinks that the receiver position can be incredibly, incredibly beneficial to the offense. And when you talk about building around pillars, right, we've talked about our 5 pillars to a successful NFL roster: the passer, the passer, the pass protector, the pass rusher, the pass defender, and the playmaker. 3 of those 5 are offensive: the passer, the pass protector, and the playmaker. David Blough saying, quote, I think every step along the way, I've gotten to learn something. And as we go forward, our staff, our collective staff, 12 or 13 coaches, we get to kind of build it up from the studs around what Jayden and Terry and Laramie and all these guys do really well to put them in the best position to be successful. End quote. Literally talking about the passer, the playmaker, and the pass protector in that one quote about how he wants to build his offense. So clearly, David Blough, Locked On Commanders, as much as we can with him being a coach and me being a media member, see eye to eye on how this thing needs to run. Coaching staffs were also announced beyond the offensive and defensive coordinators this offseason, but more went unannounced. I've got all of the coaching changes, at least as of right now, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked really good on paper, but when you got them in person, they just weren't the right fit, then you know how important it is to get that right. And when you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for Locked On, I would go to Indeed sponsored jobs. That helps the listing stand out to reach qualified candidates and quality candidates even faster. Sponsored jobs boost your posts to the people who are the best match for your role, and that can make a real difference, which is why 90% are more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results. Using Indeed sponsored jobs, listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, to the everydayers. Those of you who come through for every single episode. A special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet another one. Thank you to everybody for helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, please go check out the new Everydayer Club, LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com. You can check out the membership tier, which gives you ad-free episodes and some other stuff. And you also have the all-access tier, which gives you all that, so ad-free episodes and more. Plus, you get a daily newsletter. You get text messaging opportunities with me to share what you think, and I get to share information directly with you. Like, for example, during all these press conferences on Tuesday, all access members, you were getting all the text messages, kind of like brief summaries of every quote that I could send you. And there was a lot of text messages, but hey, I warned you, a lot of those text messages were coming through. So if you were surprised, then you just haven't been reading enough. But LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com to check out the all new Everydayer Club today. The Washington Commanders have finalized. We'll use the word finalized, though changes can always still be made. But they have, quote-unquote, finalized major staff restructuring. Obviously, new offensive coordinators have come in, but also some other new coaches have arrived, and some responsibilities have shifted for the Washington Commanders. And we're going to run down kind of the list here. The major offseason additions here. Eric Henderson is probably the biggest one. I think the one that's going to be most impactful. Comes in as the defensive line coach and is also going to get the title of run game coordinator, which I think is very interesting. We'll talk about here in just a minute. Let's first talk about the defensive line coach. Eric Henderson, coming from the USC Trojans program, but he's a very, very established coach at USC. He was the co-defensive coordinator there in Southern California. But before that, also spent time in the NFL, most notably with the Los Angeles Rams, won a Super Bowl there, coached Aaron Donald, who, of course, is legend, first ballot Hall of Famer in waiting. Aaron Donald has been on record in several press conferences and interviews talking about how much he calls Eric Henderson Henny. So he appreciates Henny. Talked about in one interview at the podium there with the time with the Rams, when he would kind of, part of his like daily routine was to sit down with Coach Henderson and go over tape, go over schemes, go over some areas that he thought Aaron Donald can continue to expand his game and his arsenal. So Eric Henderson has been very, very influential. The Rams had one of the best run defenses in the league the 5 years that he was there with the Rams. So obviously they're hoping, the Washington Commanders are, that some of that will rub off too. So again, not just the defensive line coach, but also the run game coordinator. What's interesting about the run game coordinator thing is, at least as far as I know, and again, things can still kind of fluctuate, right? Everything's still being a little bit finalized. Eric Henderson not actually on the team's website right now as on the coaching staff, but as far as I know right now, the title is going to be run game coordinator, not defensive run game coordinator. So something I'm going to be looking out for is, does that defensive run game coordinator get attached, or is it there's no need to specify because there's not going to be an offensive run game coordinator? Because as of right now, there is no quote unquote offensive run game coordinator. But I wonder if Eric Henderson, we've seen this coaching staff do a little bit of this, like you're a defensive specialist, let's talk offense because you know the defense. So I would not necessarily be surprised if Eric Henderson was just kind of handling run game coordinator duties on both sides of the ball, so to speak. My question, of course, would be time management and how much is that really going to be efficient. But it's going to be something I'm going to look out for. If there's no defensive tag attached to it, then later on in the offseason, when we get to talk to the coaches themselves, the assistant coaches, I'll get a little bit more information on that as it comes. And if I have anything else, I'll share it with you, of course. DJ Williams also arriving to be the team's quarterbacks coach. He, of course, is the son of Doug Williams. Dan Quinn telling us in his press conference on Tuesday that Doug had no part of the hiring process. They certainly didn't hire DJ just because he's the son Doug Williams, and DQ said that Doug didn't even know about it until DQ got to walk into Doug Williams' office and say, hey, just so you know, we just hired a new quarterbacks coach. And I guess Doug looked at him and was like, cool, like, thanks for letting me know, I guess. And he said, you might know who he is. And then, of course, it hit him. And, obviously that was a moment. So DJ Williams coming over as a quarterbacks coach, Danny Etling, who's got experience with David Blough from their time in the NFL together, assistant quarterbacks coach, some shifting roles on the roster. Tommy Donatell was someone that we talked about, defensive backs coach last year. Jason Simmons was the defense pass game coordinator last year. We talked about the potential of both of them leaving. Jason Simmons, no longer on the staff. He's actually with the Pittsburgh Steelers now, but Tommy Donatell is sticking around. He's been retained, and his title now reads defensive backs coach / safeties. So he's still a DB coach, but he's only responsible for the safeties. William Gay, who was the assistant defensive backs coach in 2024 and 2025, has been promoted, I would say, to defensive backs / cornerbacks coach. So basically, Tommy Donatell and William Gay are going to kind of tag team that defensive back room and split it from safeties and corners and go about it that way. No defensive pass game coordinator as of right now. And, from my understanding, I can't speak for every hire in the history of the NFL, but a lot of times when a new defensive coordinator comes in, and he used to be a defensive pass game coordinator, which, of course, Durante Jones was with the Minnesota Vikings, they kind of just, like, that's just part of their coordinating, right? Like, I'm going to coordinate the defensive pass game because that's my wheelhouse, and I'm the overall defense coordinator. So not really surprised that there's no defensive pass game coordinator on the roster. Daryl Tapp, who was the defensive lines coach for the last 2 seasons, is staying on staff. Even with the arrival of Eric Henderson, he's moving to assistant defensive line coach. And, I was talking to Daryl Tapp just, last week, and this wasn't specific to this topic, but just kind of catching up with him. And one of the things he told me is that he's loving life and has no complaints. And again, it wasn't like a specific, I didn't say, hey, what do you think of the move? But, obviously, if you're loving life and have no complaints about life, then you're not all that bent out of shape about the move either. Of course, Daryl Tapp will be another one of assistant coaches that we talk to during the offseason when we get the opportunity. Some internal offensive promotions. Darnell Stapleton was officially announced as the new offensive line coach. Bobby Johnson moving on from the team shortly after Cliff Kingsbury moved on. Again, I don't know if there's any confirmation on whether or not that's connected, but just interesting timing. Either way, Darnell Stapleton is moving up. Dan Quinn had a lot of good things to say about him as well. Shane Taub is the new assistant offensive line coach. Jesse Madden, who was a quality control coach last year, is now the assistant running backs coach. And if you recognize that last name, he is the grandson of the great John Madden. So there is a correlation there. Andre Coleman, assistant wide receivers and returners coach. He was also, I think he was a quality control coach last year as well. Might have been an assistant. Don't quote me on that, but now he's the assistant wide receivers coach. So he'll work with Bobby Ingram, and he's also a returners coach. What's a little bit mysterious is Wes Welker. So Wes Welker has been on the staff now for a little while. He is officially labeled on the website as offensive assistant. However, team source has told me that that's still kind of fluid, and like where they're going to use him is still kind of being worked out. But DQ did tell us on the record that Wes did some work last year with special teams. They did have a coach on the special team staff that is unfortunately still dealing with cancer and has had surgeries. So obviously, I mean, that's just terrible, right? So obviously prayers and thoughts are going out to him. But Wes Welker stepping up to kind of take the reins or to help out, I should say. Larry Izzo there, special teams coordinator. And also helped out the defensive side. This year he will move to the offensive side, though, again, the details are still kind of being worked out. A lot of people are asking questions about Brian Johnson. He is still on the site as the assistant head coach and offensive pass game coordinator. And when I asked, a source about the potential of Brian Johnson staying or leaving, the answer I got was everything is still kind of getting figured out. I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. The hiring of DJ Williams, again, like I said, Doug Williams obviously very happy, but did not have a say or did not have any prior knowledge. Same thing with Jayden. DQ made it very clear, like they kept Jayden, informed. Like they didn't want him to find out that Cliff had been, they were moving on from Cliff from social media or a text message. So they informed him of that. When they did the David Blough hire, they informed him of that as well. And that, he's been in the loop, but Jayden has not been like driving any of these decisions so far in the offseason. So something to keep in mind. That is the coaching staff update as we have now. Of course, like I said, everything is kind of fluid, can be different, can change. we will keep up with it as much as we can in the meantime. But next up, as much as Terry McLaurin can get a boost out of his new coordinator, so too can Frankie Luvu. Durante Jones sure sounds like he's got a plan to reemerge Frankie Luvu after basically disappearing in 2025. That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like me, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just simply makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sport you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected on the action. I'm finding out in the comments section that there are more people than I realize who are fans of curling, just like I am. But honestly, as exciting as the games are, sometimes there's also some exciting moments after the games, like interviews where people from other countries are kind of outing themselves for some things that they probably shouldn't have done. And, look, my heart goes out to the guy. I know a lot of people are like, not the right stage. My heart just kind of goes out to him. But you also have exciting events as well. Speed skating is always one of my favorites. Hockey, of course, is a game that I like watching, whether it's Olympics or not Olympics. But hey, when the Winter Games are here, you'll love seeing it even more. And even the niche events become must watch when you're locked in. So the Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. By utilizing Frankie Luvu as a downhill weapon, Durante Jones sounds like he's got a pretty solid plan, or at least he's got an idea of how to unhide, how to re-reveal. I don't know how to make Frankie Luvu re-emerge, right? In 2024, Frankie Luvu came to Washington, and I do remember, actually, I was very excited for Frankie Luvu to arrive to Washington, and some of my listeners, a good amount of Locked On Commanders listeners and viewers at the time, didn't really know anything about Frankie. So I was really excited to deliver the news to all of you that this dude was going to play with his hair on fire, a lot of intensity, all this stuff. And you saw all of it in 2024. Second team All-Pro. A lot of expectations. Then in 2025, basically got erased. You know what I mean? And very early in the season, I remember Joe Witt Jr. kind of telling us, like, yeah, these offenses are game planning for him more, and they're putting big bodies on him, they're putting guards on him and stuff like that, and we got to figure out a way to get him loose. They just never figured it out. There were moments, there were some things here and there. Over 50 pressures last year for Frankie Luvu, so it's not like he was just not a presence, right? But only 4 sacks and just not a lot of impact plays on a game-to-game basis. So how do you unlock that ability again? For Durante Jones, talking about Frankie Luvu on Tuesday, said, quote, he's best going downhill, getting him matched up on running backs. That's always the key, end quote. And as soon as he said that, I kind of went back to my time watching the Minnesota Vikings defense as we learn more about Durante Jones as much as possible. And Ivan Pace Jr. is someone that came in to mind. Ivan Pace Jr. And the thing about Ivan Pace Jr., though, is he plays significantly fewer reps on the Minnesota Vikings defense, at least in the last 2 seasons. 3 seasons ago, he did play like 900, but the last 2 seasons of snap counts have gone down a little bit, not because his effectiveness has necessarily gone down, but because the scheme just kind of continues to shift. And like I said earlier, every day, as you'll remember this, in last season's Minnesota Vikings defense, while the trademark is they're always aggressive, how they're aggressive changes. And last year they used a lot more 5-man fronts, and 5-man fronts minimizes the amount of linebackers you can have. So guys like Ivan Pace Jr. Lose reps for that. So last year, for example, Frankie Luvu played 1,111 snaps, 1,111 snaps. Ivan Pace Jr. played 656. So a significant drop in their utilization, right? However, or significant difference in the utilization. However, after that, they've got very similar stats, even down to the PFF grade, which I don't usually lean on a whole lot, but I just thought it was interesting as how similar it is. Frankie Luvu, 82 overall pass rushing grade. Ivan Pace Jr., 83.2 overall pass rushing grade. Pressure rates, Ivan Pace Jr. was at 17.6%. Frankie Luvu at 15.5%. And I think the reason you see the increased percentage specifically from Ivan Pace Jr. is because of the usage. Where this should get exciting for Frankie Luvu is, as much as Ivan Pace Jr. has been kind of a diamond in the rough find for the Minnesota Vikings, Frankie Luvu is a proven veteran talent with ability that Durante Jones, he should be better than Ivan Pace Jr. is what I'm trying to get at here. So on defensive line alignment, instead of seeing Frankie Luvu lined up on the line, say 281 times like he was in 2025, and that's crazy to me that you have a linebacker like Frankie Luvu. So, like, I agree, and we've talked about this during the course of last season, right? Durante Jones says he's best when he's running forward and when he's running downhill, which means you're getting some speed, you have some runway, you're not just at the line of scrimmage, meeting contact. 25.3% of the time, Frankie Luvu last year was on the line of scrimmage. That is zero runway. That's zero ability to use your athleticism to set a guy up one way, move inside another way. You're just right there with a big dude, clashing into him as soon as the word go happens. Ivan Pace Jr., he's on the line of scrimmage for the Minnesota Vikings less than 8% of the time. So if you equate that to Frankie Luvu's snap count, they would go from 281 snaps on the defensive line to 88. That's a huge difference. That's almost 200 snaps fewer Frankie Luvu playing on the line of scrimmage where he doesn't have a runway, where he doesn't have space between him and a blocker to where you can try to set him up, make a move, something like that. Instead, he's engaging right away, and now this O-lineman's got his hands on you, and you're trying to disengage, which is not what a linebacker is designed to necessarily do. Outside linebacker alignment, instead of seeing Luvu lined up outside linebacker 197 times, those snaps are projected to be replaced by off-ball box-type linebacker snaps, downhill rolls, talking about 574 times, roughly speaking. Again, these are rough estimates because I can't tell you exactly what Durante Jones is going to do, but just hearing him talk about that downhill roll, Ivan Pace Jr. fills that downhill roll for the Minnesota Vikings. So if the usage is somewhat similar, that's what you're going to see. Is you're going to see an uptick of about 570 reps as an outside linebacker, or as an in the box linebacker, I should say, getting that downhill angle on blockers, not on the defensive line, and you're going to see about a 200 snap decrease in the amount of times Frankie Luvu is standing on the line of scrimmage. Bottom line is Luvu spent 478 combined snaps as a static D lineman outside linebacker alignment. The Calvin Pace Jr. model in Minnesota means that you would get a whole lot more dynamic downhill blitz opportunities to minimize the thing he doesn't do well, which is outpower a 300+ pound offensive lineman and do the things he does better, which is run fast, hit hard, and use your agility. Like a guy like Frankie Luvu has a lot more dancing ability than a dancing bear does on the offensive line. And that's what Durante Jones sounds like he plans to do with number 4 in 2026. And that's going to be very exciting if that comes to fruition. So some really good plans. And again, we've heard some of this stuff before, and that's going to do it for today's episode. In the next episode, I'm actually going to break down comparisons between these introductory offensive and defense coordinator press conferences and our last introductory offensive defensive coordinator press conference. That'll come up next on Locked On Commanders. Make sure you are following along, subscribe, so you get all the latest episodes of Locked On Commanders. And you can follow me on X as well at DHarrison82 or on Instagram at DHarrison_82. And if you never miss an episode, then the Everydayer Club, literally built for you. Go to lockedoncommanders.supercast.com to check that out today. For your next listen of the day, check out the Locked On NFL podcast twice per day on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. And to the Everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every single day. And I thank you all for coming through yet again today. Until next time, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and we will talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.